Okay, so this evening we're delighted to welcome Clark Johnson and Nona Hill to Mass Bay RE. Their presentation, 850,000 Miles by Private Rail Car, chronicles the journeys of their private rail car Caritas, which traveled over 850,000 miles throughout North America from its rebirth in 1984 until it was sold in 2019. Clark Johnson is a physicist by vocation and a railroader by avocation. His interest in private cars resulted from his desire to cover as much railway trackage as possible. And since much of the North American rail network was freight only, he envisioned tacking a private car onto freight trains. He found a small cadre of fellow mileage collectors that made those special trains possible. Nona Hill met Clark Johnson in 1991 on a trip he was operating on the Wisconsin and Calumet Railroad. By 1982, she was part of High Iron Travel, Clark's life, and countless travel opportunities on planes, trains, and automobiles. She has served as treasurer for the Center of Railroad Photography and Art since 2013 and has served as an officer for both the Wisconsin Association of Railroad Passengers and All Aboard Wisconsin. So, Clark and Nona, welcome to Mass Bay RE.
Thank you, Dave. We're delighted to be here. I've been a member of RRE for over 50 years, ever since I joined it when I first moved to Boston in 1965. Anyway, this is our first brochure, and it was pretty attractive, but did not attract any customers. I am not from a railroad family. I became fascinated with trains by watching from my high chair the M and St. L switch cars in their incoming yard across the street. My first memory of a PV was seeing the M and St. L business car go by being pulled by a doodlebug. And here's a picture that was taken not by me, but in 1941. And this is the main corporate staff of the M and St. L with Mr. Sprague on the right, looking sort of downcast. The power poles in the back, believe it or not, are still standing. This was behind me is the M and St. L Cedar Lake Roundhouse. Mr. Sprague was the railroad savior, and around 1944, Mr. Sprague personally showed me the Twin Cities. That's the car you see there. Some 10 years later, I borrowed it for a rail fan trip on the Minnesota Western Railway that the M and St. L had just acquired. This 114-mile-long Granger line terminated in the tiny unincorporated village of Glick, where the railroads today remains hardly visible. Only about 15 miles remain as a switching line west of Minneapolis. It was my first ride, however, on a business car, and I was hooked. In 1963, six of us decided we liked the idea of a private car and bought this delight. This is a Soo Line business car built by Barney and Smith in 1903. They're number 48. It had a number of really good railfan features. Excuse me. It had an extraordinary deep platform, a nice lounge, and some of you who ride with us regularly may notice it has a similar configuration as the Caritas. Anyway, this car had no air conditioning when we got it, so we found an old refrigerator from a trucking company and installed that. We renamed it the Twin Cities and used it primarily on trips out of Minneapolis. On the M and St. L, Chicago Great Western, Grand Trunk, Soo Line, and Milwaukee. One memorable trip on the South Shore to Michigan City was pulled by a scheduled passenger train out of Randolph Street Station, and there it is in Michigan City. It was before actually we put the name on it. It still was Soo Line 48. I need to make a comment about this trip. One of the trips we made when we went from Minneapolis to Detroit, We took the Milwaukee night train down to Chicago, and then took the Grand Trunk Western from Chicago via Durand to Detroit. The thing was astonishing about it is that the car was switched between Union Station in Chicago and Dearborn Station in 4 hours. Imagine having that happen today on Amtrak. Unfortunately, the group broke up in 1966. I moved to Boston, and the car was sold to the New Hope and Ivyland Railroad, where it became their business car. Unfortunately, the president of the New Hope and Ivyland who bought it died a few months later, and the car sat there unused for 3 years. Finally ended up being a restaurant in Walnut Creek, California, on the SB's San Ramon branch. Anyway, I was now hooked, and in 1982, the CN decided that they were going to sell their fleet of ex-Frisco, ex-Katy 14-4 sleepers. And so I went to Toronto, and with the help of an insider, made a bid on one named the Pierre Laclade, only it was called the Churchill Falls when it was on the on CN and then via. I paid $10,000 for this dude, and took it back to Chicago and Milwaukee on Amtrak. The other car there is the Cimarron River, which you all know runs with us frequently, and is owned by the Marciano brothers. I hired a local design company to do the interior, and for their work, they won a $10,000 prize for the best Art Deco design in 1984. The operating goal was to be able to sleep 8 guests in a crew of 2, with the ability of self-sufficiency for a week-long trip, only having to add water. This meant large fuel tanks, water and sewage tanks, and 2 generators. And having 2 generators proved crucial when one failed in Adams, Wisconsin, in 30 below zero weather. This is a picture of the Caritas inside Milwaukee railcar during its refurbishment. And you can see it was really a total reconstruction. The 14 roomettes were taken out and replaced with a lounge and platform and kitchen. And here's another picture of it. It's been painted, but clearly the end is not finished. Here's how it looked when we bought it. This is 14 roomettes and 4 bedrooms. We kept the 4 bedrooms, and from about where roomette 11 and 12 are, it was gutted. That's converted into the lounge and kitchen, and we added a master bedroom with shower and double bed. And this is how it ended up after conversion. It left Milwaukee Railcar on the 11th of November, 1984, Veterans Day. And here my son, Brett, and I are smashing a bottle of really cheap champagne on the coupler. The trip to Minneapolis on the back of a Sioux Line freight revealed some number of issues. One consequence was in taking out the roomettes, we had lightened this end of the car by over 5 tons, and that caused the springs to have too much tension, and we bounced our way to Minneapolis. Well, I recalculated the spring constant, and we put in new springs, and the next trip was quite successful. I thought the leasing such a glamorous PV would generate enough money for basic expenses, maintenance, insurance, parking, etc. But I was wrong, really wrong. Few people even knew about PVs, much less had a desire to ride them. So we started running excursion trips. In the end of the 1980s and early 90s, the railroads were okay attaching a PV to the rear of a freight, often behind the caboose. I had not considered a number of issues, however. First of all, there was winter parking. While the Caritas was fully winterized, we scarcely used it in the wintertime, and it slept around in 18 different locations in 35 years. I'll mention a couple of the more bizarre ones. The engine house on the now defunct Nicolay Badger and Northern in Leona, Wisconsin. The engine house of the ex-Charles City Western in Charles City, Iowa. The Sioux Shoreham Roundhouse in Minneapolis, now condos. And the former T&O SP shop in San Antonio, Texas, sorry. And an obscure sighting in McCurdy, Indiana. We quickly learned that there was a small subcategory of rail fans who were ardent mileage collectors, as I was, and who were willing to pay in excess of $1,000 a day to explore new routes. In 1987, we ran our first high iron explorers, but we used volunteer help. I didn't know any different. I thought all rail fan trips ran with volunteer help. When Nona came on board a couple of years later, she put a stop to that, and we started paying our help. Here's the map of the sea of Canada, and it shows where the first trip ran. I don't have a pointer, but it ran up to Great Slave Lake at the very top, and there's a little extension to the right over to a place called Hay River, and maybe you see that
up here.
Okay, I guess
they can.
Okay, anyway, that Hay River extension, 57 miles long, that runs east-west at the top of the map, was to serve a mine at the end, and the mine had been closed a few weeks before we got there. And we were really hated because the residents who now didn't have jobs and were stuck in the most godforsaken place I've ever been didn't know what to do next and thought we were the mine owners coming in on this fancy train, and were not very happy with this. Anyway, this trip covered an extraordinary amount of really rare mileage, and I'm sorry. In retrospect, I'm a little surprised it came off. We traveled 6,000 miles into the Canadian wilderness. However, to avoid having to obtain liquor licenses in all of the provinces, we had an open bar, and it ran out of booze the first night. That's when I discovered how expensive liquor was in Canada. One of the most in addition to the abandonment of the branch line out the Hay River, I estimate we have covered over 20,000 miles of rail lines that no longer exist. It was during a stop at Roycraft, in which there's a Y and there's a branch, there's a little branch line, which is down at the bottom of this map. We stopped at Roycraft for lunch and discovered this branch. And I asked the train master, I said, what's the possibility of pushing down there? He was riding with us. And he said, sure, we'll do that. And so we did. And it turns out that the train master's name is Jim Vina, now president of the Union Pacific. Starting in 1992, Nona and I drove each route, visiting railroad division points to discuss possible operating issues, locating parking options, water, sewage, nearby local grocery stores and liquor stores, and safe mud-free access. For each trip, we prepared a booklet, a route guide that included maps, local and railway history, operating timetables, and a schedule. Here are half a dozen of the 17 books that we put out. We always tried to park before dinner each night so the passengers could eat off the train and explore locally. This is the reverse of what cruise ships do. They travel at night and park by day, but our guests didn't care about seeing the town. They wanted to see the railroad. In addition to the 17 explorers trips, we ran 5 They covered over 80% of the Mexican mileage and actually went into Guatemala twice. We also covered about 60% of Canadian rail mileage. There were also numerous weekend jaunts with a three-car train. Working with the railroads was becoming increasingly difficult. The old management folks who'd been on board in railroads operated passenger service were retiring. The new hires were often not railroaders, but lawyers, accountants, and hedge fund managers. Passengers terrified them. No longer could we move occupied cars and freight trains. Many of you out there have had the opportunity to ride with us on the Caritas at the end of a 100-car freight in the early days. However, we had several remarkable friends. The first was Ed Burkhardt. When he formed the Wisconsin Central, the railroad became friendly. He had been our friend of the Northwestern, frequently moving the Caritas between Minneapolis and Milwaukee, and permitted us to go virtually anywhere on the system. And here's our train coming into Neenah Menasha on one of our first trips. There's the Cimarron River, the Pine Tree State, and the Caritas. One of the our first trip on the Wisconsin Central was Chicago Shore Park all the way to Duluth with Ed at the throttle. It was an exciting ride. One of the interesting aspects of it was many times the crossing gates were coming down just as the platform of the Caritas was going over the crossing. One of our trips was on the Green Bay and Western after it was acquired by the Wisconsin Central, and we actually backed down into the yards at Kewanee. This is where they used to use. We used to load the boats across Lake Michigan. And this was 3 years after the last train had been there, and the yard had turned into an extensive gull rookery, and our backing down to the dock caused furious bird activity, and the train subsequently did a serious bath. We also had good relations with the KCS. Our first contact with the KCS, before Mr. Haverty took over, we wanted to move the Caritas unoccupied just to get it where it needed to be. They said, "We do not handle passenger cars," and hung up. In 1996, when Haverty became president, we were welcomed on the railroad. Over the following years, we covered the entire system from Tuscaloosa to Fort Worth, Kansas City to Port Arthur, and our last trip on the KCS went all the way down to Lázaro Cárdenas in southern Mexico. And here's one of our trips. This is on the Gateway Western going across Missouri. We twice went into Guatemala at Tucán-Yuman, where the gauge changes. Now, normally Guatemala requests a passport, but $5 from each passenger worked just as well. And this is not at the border, but you can see there's a officer with a gun standing back there, making sure we don't get into trouble. You probably recognize a good number of the people on this on the platform, and this happens to be the Wisconsin Central's observation car. The Caritas was sick then. Virtually everybody on that platform is dead, with the exception of Sharon Sherritt.
John Godfrey.
John Godfrey, yes, of course. He'll never die.
We hope.
Anyway, going into Guatemala was really interesting because it's narrow gauge in Guatemala, but there's about 1.5 miles of dual gauge. Putting Caritas on freight moves generally required $10 to $25 million liability insurance but became a really serious issue after the Chase Amtrak wreck. Many of the railroads simply refused to handle occupied passenger cars and freight trains, even though there was a drover's tariff in place to do so. We could still travel on regional railroads, and a couple of Class 1s, like the CP, which now operated most of the Milwaukee lines, were very supportive and allowed us to travel. And here we are on the Milwaukee, coming across northern Iowa. We're about 7 miles from Marquette on the Mississippi River, heading to Mason City. And the cars on that are the Caritas, Silver Rapids, Pine Tree State, Cimarron River, Columbia River, Native Sun, and North Star. And this is a photo run by. You can see the step box is still sitting in the ballast. I need to mention a couple of other interesting trips. The largest collection of private cars, 35 in total, was the 1995 convention, APRCO convention in Nelson, British Columbia. Nona and I were the trip chairpersons. There were two special trains, one originating from from Chicago, shown here, and the other originating from Los Angeles. This is at Kootenai Landing, British Columbia, September 2nd, 1995. And here is a view by Jack Swanberg, taken of the two trains. We had more passenger cars in the Nelson Yard than there were freight cars. This is a fabulous town, which I recommend to visit. But here we have 35 operating passenger cars in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. Amtrak is generally willing to operate special trains offline, and this is how we operated many high-end explorers trips. Amtrak would furnish the locomotives and crew, and the host railroad a pilot and often a trainmaster. When the later were on board, they were able to operate. They were able to authorize on-the-fly photo stops and photo run-bys, which we had on virtually every trip. When the new Amtrak president, Richard Anderson from Delta, took over, all non-Amtrak route special trains were prohibited. Our last Amtrak offline special was June of 2016. The Front Range Explorers went from Denver up the Wind River on the BNSF through Forsyth, Montana. This is going up the Wind River Canyon. And over a piece of the former Milwaukee from Terry, Montana to Appleton, Minnesota, where we returned to BNS rails to Minneapolis. This is one of my favorite pictures because of the magnificent scenery. However, by the time High Iron had become a subsidiary of Iowa Pacific, it now had insurance. Their insurance enabled operation of a number of specials. In 2012, Pan Am Railways, known to everybody here as the Boston and Maine, ran a trip for us out of Boston's North Station to Mechanicville, and then back to Hoosick Junction, where we got on the Vermont Railway. And here we are entering the Hoosick Tunnel. We've just had a photo run by, and the train will go into the tunnel and then come back and get us. This is the same train crossing the Hudson River on the B&M. And finally, we backed in to North Bennington and parked there overnight. The Caritas, because of the reverse direction, is at the other end of the train. But I really like this picture because it is so spectacular railroady. Iowa Pacific provide opportunities for trips too. And here is the Caritas in Globe, Arizona. But at that time, they operated the Arizona Eastern, and this is the depot in Globe. One of the more interesting operations that we had was when Iowa Pacific was operating the Texas State Railway, and Amtrak had a reroute on 21 and 22 via Palestine, Texas. So we took the Caritas off of 21 and put it back on 22 using using a steam engine. I think probably is the only time a steam engine has switched an Amtrak train. And then we had a chance to go on the Mason City and Clear Lake, which is here, and you can see the overhead wire. Rarely do you have a chance to run an excursion on a electric railway. COVID and Iowa Pacific's bankruptcy ended high iron travel. The Caritas, with 850,000 miles on it during our ownership, was sold to the Friends of the 261 and continues to ply the rails. And here we are on Bennett Levin's National Park Special going through Naperville. And so now I'm going to turn over to my partner, and she'll tell you all about other trips.
I'm going to share some glimpses of some of the things that happen as you travel by private car. When we presented this program for the Lexington group last November, we were also allowed to submit an article that was published in a book for all the attendees. And in that book, I was able to mention that none of our trips would have been possible without our dedicated crews, especially Tom and Sharon Sherritt, Steve and Donna DeGroat, and our chef Clay Hollifield, among many others. Their hard work would not have gave me the opportunity to be on the train and enjoy the trips. They gave countless hours of their time over the years and made our participation completely possible. My presentation is dedicated to my crews. I am about to share Clark in 1937, standing on the SP 4411, when his mother and grandmother took him to California to recuperate from a bout of pneumonia. And I found this picture of me in El Paso, Texas, when I was lucky enough to be able to leave school and take the train to Phoenix with my mom to visit my grandparents. I find it amazing that two children from the Midwest ended up in front of SP steam locomotives, the only early photos I could locate for either of us that included a standard gauge locomotive. This is a picture that shows the very best part of private car travel. A sunny day on a freight line with no platform restrictions, and most of the passengers probably dining or napping. Our passengers frequently send us photos of trips. This one arrived in a Christmas card from Frank Fairbanks. A two-car train to Topolobampo, Mexico, parked near the Copper Canyon. Probably early morning before departure. These photo gifts were precious. We never would have seen this particular view without it. I'm sure Clark and I were on the car, too busy to be outside with a camera, or perhaps still sleeping. Group photos were taken whenever and wherever possible, as this Durango shot illustrates. Bill Farmer, who took the picture, enabled us to travel to Mexico as he spoke fluent Choo-Choo Spanish, which allowed us to communicate with both the railroad crew and the onboard crew that we were required to hire when we were in Mexico. I inherited the kitchen on the left in 1992, and the photos on the right show the 2008 remodel and current kitchen. No original location of any appliance changed, but we had much less to worry about on-the-road repairs for the next few years after a major remodel like this. And our cooks were very happy. Now I have a series of photos I call Things That Can Stop a Train. This washout near War Road, Minnesota certainly prevented us from getting the mileage beyond the stop sign. The liquor delivery for the Aprico car party was delayed by an inexperienced driver and a slightly wider turn than required for the platform in Tampa. Back under the overhang in the background is Jim Larson, Vice President of Operations in Amtrak, but he's too far away to see if he's laughing or upset from this distance. The grinning driver and fellow car owner had borrowed the cart from Amtrak and is about to go get some assistance. The car party went on as scheduled. Before this trip, if you had told me that tumbleweed could stop a train, I would not have believed you. Now we have proof. It was a windy day on what is now the Kansas and Oklahoma Railroad, and the tumbleweed was moving across the track. It built up in front of the train until the engineer could not see to continue. Many hands make light work, but it doesn't keep the dust from making you cough and sneeze. And by the way, that's Bill Crawford right there, on the left, helping to move the debris.
And John Godfrey there too with his his sunglasses.
Yeah, he was our mechanic on many trips. This is Whitetail, Montana. It's the original western extension of the Minneapolis-St. Paul and Sault Ste. Marie Railroad, the Soo Line. But its plans to reach the West Coast never made it past Whitetail. We are stopped because the view from the locomotive looks like this. You can see that the grading went beyond where the track ends. Our longtime chef, Clay, asked for a copy of this photo to explain mileage collecting to his mother. As a Disney employee at Epcot, she just did not understand why we went all the way out to the middle of a wheat field where there was nothing else to see or do there. On a smoking stop in Texas, we took the time to record the passing of the Grey Poupon mustard from an SP business car to the Caritas, staged because of a popular TV commercial at the time that showed the same thing between a couple of Rolls Royces at Ascot. Clark's son Taylor was ferrying the Caritas on the DWP between Duluth and Winnipeg when the Canadian customs agent asked him how much liquor he had on board. Clark and I were driving to Winnipeg and had neglected to do any strategic storage before we left the train. Taylor ended up paying a $300 fine for our oversight, but he was able to get this rare picture of Canadian customs at work. No doubt this photo would be strictly prohibited today. Had Clark and I thought about customs ahead of time, there only would have been a few bottles in the liquor cabinet. A Pullman sleeper has wonderful liquor storage possibilities in every bedroom. Here are a couple of unusual on-the-road experiences, again from Mexico. On the left, we have rolled out our larger generator for a minor repair and an oil change. On the right, we have the most unusual diesel fuel delivery ever. There was no access for a truck where we were parked, so two young men wheeled a 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel on a hand cart and spun a little hand pump to fill our tank. A needs-must situation, and it worked like a dream. The gentleman on the right is our Pullman conductor who guarded the train throughout the trip. We made two wonderful trips along the Oregon coast and enjoyed the advantage of a gondola car with seats that we christened the Vistagon. It enabled all of our passengers to be outdoors with unobstructed views except during rain showers. On the second trip, the former Prairie Rose, back to its original name Montana, right behind the gondola in this picture, derailed. We were miles away from any assistance in the middle of a densely wooded area. That stopped us until a crew with a re-railing frog could reach us, a matter of a few hours. We had no cell service until much later in the day when Clark had the difficult task of calling the car owners and telling them what had happened. Fortunately, we were able to complete our excursion, but the Montana had an extended stay in Portland for wheel repairs before it was able to be on an Amtrak train and return to its home in Minneapolis. Sorry, excuse me. This trip on the Colorado and Wyoming Railroad was arranged for the receiver to show the line to prospective buyers. Clark spotted this turntable when we were heading out and asked if we could turn the car so that the passengers could enjoy the view when they were heading back. It was such a tight fit that the receiver insisted that Clark write him a release to take all responsibility should anything go wrong. I have a series of photos of the entire event. Too bad I did not have video capability on my camera at the time. The fence had to be held away for the coupler to clear, and a tractor helped pull the turntable with a rope when manpower was not enough to budget. And this photo is to remind me to talk about logistics, the bane of organizing the arrival and departure of the crew, groceries, rental cars, airport pickups, buses, whatever and whenever needed for any given trip. This day we had just unloaded the lounge chairs from the Caritas. My sister and I are about to drive Tom Sherritt's car with the trailer to take them to Hermansville, Michigan for new upholstery. We would leave the trailer there, drive back to Minneapolis to get me home. Sharon would go on to Westby to get her car back from Tom, and she would go back to Madison. 2 weeks later, Tom would pick up the finished chairs and the trailer and bring them back to Midway Station in time for our next trip. It all went like clockwork, and the total price was less than any upholsterer in Minneapolis would have charged me. Another pic from Mexico with our Mexican crew and the Prairie Rose being used as a dining car. The chef usually cooked in the Caritas kitchen with its larger capacity refrigerator, stove, and oven, and the crew ferried food next door to the Prairie Rose. This extra room enabled us to feed all of the passengers in 2 seatings and freed up the Caritas lounge for those waiting for second call to dinner.
I want you to laugh. Some of the people in there mention some of the names.
When people we did not know first heard that we owned and operated a railroad car, they would ask about the beautiful scenery we had seen. Almost anything I see from a train can be interesting, but our passengers were paying the fare for mileage. It did not matter if we were in this desert environment or in northern Wisconsin in a forest of trees. The view was not the allure. They wanted the miles, in daylight if possible, and the only thing that really disappointed them was any change in plan that prevented them from getting any inch of the mileage that Clark had originally promised in the trip brochure. On the other hand, we saw many amazing sights and had lots of worthwhile and even spectacular photo run-bys. As you can see from the distance here, the train had to back up a long way for us to get this shot of the Devil's Spine, again in Mexico. This is my chief plumber, electrician, and mechanic doing his best to ruin one of the dining room tables in the lounge. I had to stop him while I found some newspaper to protect the table before the saw came out. He is converting a U.S. head-end power cable to a Canadian one so that we can get HEP while parked in stations and on trains on Via Rail in Canada. And here he is voiding the warranty on his MacBook. The computer was not working, and much to my surprise and our passengers, he had quite an audience for this procedure. He fixed the problem, and that little computer served him well for many years. You meet some interesting people along the way. This young man brought his M&M friends with him on a day trip from Boston to New York and back. He set them up at various places around the car for special photo shoots, and then put them all on the platform prior to departure that evening so he could film them in the tunnel as we left Penn Station. He was happy to let me record the moment for our photo albums that lived on board the car. I have several pictures from my hometown, Madison, Wisconsin. In this one, we brought the car into Madison for my niece's wedding and parked a block and a half from the house I grew up in, where my brother was still living. We used the car for a baby shower for another niece and woke up the day of the wedding to this. Instead of helping to decorate the church, I was off to the auto parts store for carbon choke cleaner and lots of paper towels. Fortunately, it removes fresh spray paint easily on the body, but the Lexan windows were cloudy until they were replaced. This is an Iowa Pacific special from Chicago to Madison to Prairie du Chien, caught crossing Lake Monona with a view of the Capitol and downtown Madison. One of my favorite pictures, and one that we have in our family room along with the Wind River picture that Clark showed. Fortunately, Ed Ellis knew the photographer, and I was able to get a full-size image for our 12 by 36 canvas print that we enjoy seeing every day. And an Apico Midwest special a few years earlier on the same route, parked at the former Milwaukee Road Station in Madison with color-coordinated trains and tulips. The train on the right is a stationary display. The station is now a bicycle shop, and the freight house is a very fine local supper club called the Harvey House. The Caritas is still running. It is owned by the Friends of the 261 and lives in Minneapolis. Clark and I were invited to ride on a positioning move from Chicago to New Orleans recently, and we thoroughly enjoyed our visit. The Art Deco ladies are still in the lounge, although they light up in a rainbow of new and different colors now. As you can see, if you have been on the car, the rear door is new. You can no longer keep track of your great nieces and nephews' growth by which window they can see out of, or frame that perfect shot from inside the lounge. If you have any photos framed by that door, treasure them. It really was the best of fun and worth every minute, as this Mardi Gras trip to New Orleans shows in those smiles. Before any questions, I would like to explain why I chose this galloping goose photo. I never expected that I would ever ride one. I had no idea there was a functioning goose that could still be used. A summer trip to Alamosa enabled us to divide our passengers into 3 groups, and everyone rode on the Chama steam train, the goose, and the bus for part of one day. A minor miracle and a memorable day, with fellow car owner Fred Springer as our conductor on the Galloping Goose.